history of Britain has often been shaped by war. Our ancestors fought to defend their land, their cultures and their beliefs, sometimes against invaders like the Normans and the Romans, constantly getting driven back here, and other times against their fellow countrymen.
Forget your chivalry. This is life or death.
And I'm curious to learn more about the key battles in British history to discover how they've influenced our past and our present.
From the massacre of a Celtic warrior queen and her army,
They're coming for you, and they're covered in steel.
to the Scottish king who defied the odds in a fight for independence.
A poorly armed band of men going up against the might of Christendom.
So I'll be meeting historians, archaeologists, weapons experts,
And enthusiasts who continue to live and breathe the stories.
to find out how 6 critical battles changed the path of this country. I'm in Northamptonshire, on my way to a battlefield where England changed from being a monarchy to a republic. It's hard to believe now, but 370 odd years ago, members of Parliament were in armed conflict with their king. The country was split, divided roughly between the East and the West, the parliamentarians and the royalists, the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. And it was a battle near this very spot that was the turning point in England's first civil war.
At the start of the 1640s, Charles I was king.
Charles very much believes that he has a God-given right to rule England, Ireland and Scotland. He's a man who subscribes to the prevailing ideology of the time, which is that kings are appointed by God. When Parliament meets in 1640, the MPs present a series of grievances about Charles's government, and it's everything from raising soldiers in illegal ways to illegal taxes, lots of stuff about the church. His church is very unpopular.
There was growing disapproval of the king, and his attempts to stop free speech only added fuel to the anger.
There was a notorious case when 3 authors who were quite critical of the court and of the church of Charles were prosecuted and were imprisoned for life and had their ears cut off. And this was seen as being a step too far, particularly because these guys were members of the social elite. You know, this kind of stuff happened to the poor all the time. Charles appears to many to be quite the tyrant.
The disagreements between the king and the country's MPs reached a climax on this very site in 1642.
Charles I had stormed into the House of Commons with an armed guard and demanded that they hand over 5 members of Parliament on the grounds of treason. No English sovereign had ever ventured inside the Commons before. It was regarded as a gross breach of parliamentary privilege. The 5 MPs were not handed over, and any support that Charles had inside the chamber immediately vanished.
Parliament no longer trusted the king. MPs passed a law to stop him taking control of any military forces which he could deploy against them.
There's this kind of battle for control of the city militia, which Parliament wins, and Charles then flees London. And he ends up in Hampton Court, and he has to leave so quickly that with the royal family that when he gets to Hampton Court, the 5 of them have to share a bed because they've not prepared anything. Eventually, Charles ends up in Oxford, and I think the reason he chooses Oxford is that it's quite strategically sensible and that it's in a kind of wealthy part of the country. But the real upshot of the whole thing, is that there are now these kind of 2 political centres. There's London, and then there's the royal court.
With the country divided, both sides began preparing for civil war.
Over the summer of 1642, both Parliament and the King try and raise troops. Broadly speaking, the South and the East, particularly East Anglia, but also London, are parliamentarian, and the North and the West are broadly royalist.
The 2 sides were amassing armies and weapons for a battle like no other. In order to decide who ruled the country, king or parliament, it was now inevitable that blood would be spilled.
By the 17th century, there was one lethal invention that dominated the battlefield: gunpowder.
Invented in China in the 9th century, it took 400 years for gunpowder to reach Europe. Combined with new designs of artillery and handguns, gunpowder was now changing the way battles were fought. The English Civil War led to a huge increase in its production. I've come to the Royal Gunpowder Mills in Essex to learn more about its use in the Battle of Naseby.
Hello. You must be Colin.
I am. You must be Rob.
I am. Nice to meet you, Colin. I feel a bit underdressed, actually.
I'm dressed as a typical musketeer of the Civil War.
It turns out Colin's got 5 kilos of gunpowder in the boot of his car. It's just as well he's got 25 years of handling experience as a battle reenactor.
What is gunpowder then? What is it actually made of?
So, potassium nitrate, which
Okay.
basically looks like a white powder.
Yeah.
Sulfur.
Which I know has a smell to it. That's what I remember from GCSE.
And then charcoal. It's ordinary charcoal. Potassium nitrate actually comes from urine and feces.
Organic matter, as
Organic
it
matter,
decomposes, you
yes.
get left with
Yeah.
potassium nitrate.
Yeah. There was actually a set of people who used to go around called gong farmers who actually emptied out latrines in houses. So basically you did your business down a hole into a room, they'd come along and actually shift it out, and in amongst that you would actually find potassium sulfate crystals.
So that would have been an industry then at the
Yes.
time, going around and collecting organic waste, shall we say.
As I say, they're called gong farmers.
And that's all you need there. Those 3 components there, mix those together.
It doesn't actually really become gunpowder until you actually mix it with water. It's called caking. Gunpowder is hygroscopic. Basically, it sucks moisture out of the air, and the wetter it gets, the slower it burns. It gets to a point where it gets so wet that it won't light at all. You've heard the phrase, keep your powder dry?
Yeah.
That's why.
Even when the 3 substances were combined, there was no danger until they were ignited.
All right, Colin, this looks interesting. What have we got laid out here?
I'm going to show you how fast black powder burns. They get it wrong in cartoons because it burns a lot faster than they show you, so you can't actually put it out.
All right, well, I'll stand back and I'll let you get to it. This is going to go quick, is it, Colin?
Fairly quick.
Whoa! Yeah!
As you
That
can
was
see.
brilliant!
Would you have time to try and kick that and stop it going?
No, you wouldn't. You'd need to be Usain Bolt to catch up with that kind of thing.
If you control it and actually direct it, it's a devastating amount of energy.
Gunpowder was at its most effective when used in artillery, especially muskets, long guns introduced in the 16th century that were capable of piercing armour.
So a lot of the kit you've got on here for you is about loading and firing the musket here, is it?
Yes. So these would actually hold a shot of powder each. So the balls you would actually hold in your mouth, which is really great because it's lead balls. But you basically powder down, spit the ball down, and then stick the wadding down, and then ram it home.
Gotcha.
So the wadding is there to actually make a gas-tight seal.
Yep.
So when the powder explodes, it can't escape round the ball, it's pushing the ball out and the wadding.
Can we fire a musket, do you think, Colin?
Well, so long as the rain holds off, yes.
This is the musket we're going to fire, is it?
Yes.
Great.
So if I go through the full drill first.
Yeah.
So handle your musket, open your pan. So that's the charge. Tear off the top, pour down the powder and wadding.
Yeah.
Ram home your charge. Blow on your coals. Prepare to give fire. Give fire.
And did it fire? Goodness me!
So that's the difference between compression and non-compression of gunpowder.
So in there, that gunpowder's got nowhere to go when it's ignited, apart from propelling
Yep.
your ballistic forwards.
Yep.
Whereas earlier when we did the trail, and it had the
Yeah.
atmosphere, to explode out into.
On the trail, we had about 10 times as much powder as we had there.
So is there any chance that I might have a little go at firing?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah? Well, if I'm going to play the part, I want to look the part. Give me 1 sec, I'll be right back.
While I get battle ready, Colin primes his musket again.
All right, Colin, what do we think?
Looking better.
Made to measure?
Need to work on the bottom half though.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. Just keep the camera high then, and then I'll look the part.
Right.
There's somewhere left hand, is
Left
it?
hand.
Keeping that out the way there. And it is just point and shoot.
It is, but it's squeeze the trigger.
Okay, so open
Right.
it, the flash pan comes open.
Prepare to fire.
Oh, goodness.
Give fire.
I had to shut my eyes. God, there's a little bit of kick on it as well.
There's a bit of kick. You can imagine all those farm boys on the field carrying these. They probably had their eyes closed as well.
You're probably right. You're probably right.
During the year 1642, both the King's army and the parliamentary forces were making arms and gunpowder at an accelerated rate. The stage was set for one of the most explosive conflicts that England had ever seen. With the country divided, England was now on the brink of civil war.
There were a number of reasons why parliamentarians distrusted Charles I. He'd imposed a series of unpopular taxes on the public. He favoured Roman Catholicism.
What's more, his controversial marriage to a Catholic was viewed with anger by many members of Parliament, who belonged to a relatively new religious movement, Puritanism. Puritans sought to purge the Church of England of Roman Catholic influence.
Puritans tend to have a slightly more sort of democratic view of the church. They don't necessarily agree with the real kind of hard ceremonial aspects of Charles's church. Puritans are likely to be very restrained in the way that they drink, the way that they enjoy themselves. They take a dim view of swearing, and they believe that people should basically kind of form their own congregations.
The King's religious views did nothing to improve his standing with the Puritan MPs.
Puritans disapproved of the closeness of Charles's court to Catholicism. In the 1630s, when Charles had he'd been ruling as a sort of personal monarch, the Puritans had really been out in the cold. They had found themselves kind of ousted from churches, and they found that Charles's bishops were really kind of clamping down on Puritan activities like kind of lecturing and going to sermons outside your parish. And I think that's really where we find the roots of the Puritan anger against Charles and his government.
One MP and a member of the Puritan movement was a gentleman farmer of modest income, Oliver Cromwell.
Cromwell's origins are in East Anglia. He does come from a class of farmers who are relatively wealthy, generally literate, generally quite well educated. He went to a grammar school and he went to a Puritan college in Cambridge. He's actually still a bit of a mystery because he's still a fairly minor character. He's won a couple of quite useful battles. He was quite significant in Marston Moor.
Oliver Cromwell was a deeply religious man. He had enormous energy and a temperament that was often fiery and ruthless.
By the end of 1644, the Civil War had been raging for more than 2 years without conclusion. Parliament's soldiers were mostly unpaid amateurs, and their loyalties were more regional than national. It was time to reorganise their army under fierce Puritan leaders like Oliver Cromwell. The Parliamentary Army was known variously as the Roundheads and the Redcoats. Their reorganisation as a new model army took place in February 1645, 4 months before the Battle of Naseby.
Ostensibly, the parliamentary cause had been fought by those fighting for the people, but it's still been very much run by the social elites. And these were gentlemen amateurs. They weren't necessarily the best soldiers, but they had high social standing. And actually, what the new model army was going to be is, yes, it was going to be a very effective fighting force, but one of the big reasons behind that was it was going to be led by very effective soldiers. Parliament
basically realises that some of the old commanders, like the Earl of Essex, the Earl of Manchester, are not, they're not pushing the war as robustly as they should be. Perhaps they're not as competent as some of the other commanders. Having kind of cleared out this sort of old guard, Parliament then reorganises the army under the command of three much more competent commanders, Fairfax, Skippon and Cromwell.
Sir Thomas Fairfax was appointed leader of the new model army, with Oliver Cromwell second in command. Both were extreme Puritans.
You see this ideological and religious zeal emerge. Cromwell embodies those very fierce Puritan idealistic beliefs. And so the creation of the army and unifying its ideological purpose is a way that it's going to grip this situation to try and force a successful end to the war. What the new model army did was about embracing skill at arms. It was about effectively embodying that as part of a person's identity. You would become a soldier, and the defining factor of that would be your skill with your weapons.
In 1645, King Charles I counted on a force of 40,000 men to defend the royalist cause, while the new model army of redcoats fighting for Parliament numbered 22,000, all instilled with Puritan beliefs.
By April, after an intensive period of training, the redcoats were ready. But how they'd perform in battle was a complete unknown.
After a series of sieges and raids across the Midlands and the West Country, in which the king seemed to have the upper hand, the two sides were on course for a major clash. I'm meeting historian and author Mike Ingram to find out why Naseby in Northamptonshire became their battleground.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to meet you.
This is quite a spot to meet, isn't it?
It certainly is.
I mean, where exactly is Naseby in respect to where we are here? Naseby's a small village.
Naseby's a small village. It's behind us over the ridges.
How did it come to pass that the two armies met and fought the battle here?
Parliament is laying siege to Oxford, which has been the King's headquarters. What Parliament doesn't know is that the King has left Oxford and he's heading north, and they're gathering their forces as they move up the country. The siege of Oxford had meant that Oxford itself was incredibly short of supplies. So the Royalist army stops from Market Harborough. They're taxing the landscape. They're taking all the cattle, all the sheep that they can find in Naseby and all the villages around here, to take them back down to Oxford to relieve the men that were suffering in the sieges. So once that's taken place, they then turn round and continue with their original task north to take control of Yorkshire again, which they'd lost control of the previous year. Parliament then sends the instructions to Fairfax to go after the Royalists and bring them to a decisive battle somewhere in the middle of England.
But we're not exactly sure about how much each side knew about what the other side were doing at any one time.
It's like a giant game of chess. They're trying to get strategic positions and to move themselves into better places.
I guess what's really important to understand is that communications at that time would have been very limited compared to what we're used to here.
They haven't got the luxury of anything fast. It's literally messengers that are riding by horse from place to place.
But that night, an unforeseen encounter got the battle off to an early start.
It's the night before the battle in the village of Naseby itself, where parliamentarian cavalry troopers come across Royalists sitting down having lunch.
Wow.
At a table in the manor house.
Wow.
And it's at that point then that everybody realises we're literally on top of each other. There's going to be a battle.
The arrival of the parliamentary army was signalled to the king, who was 6 miles away in Market Harborough. He set off towards Naseby, leading the bulk of the Royalist army.
In the early hours on the morning of the 14th of June, 1645, Charles I marched his army south to a ridge between Little Oxenden and East Farndon. A scout had been sent out ahead to find the parliamentarians' new model army, but in the thick fog, he saw nothing.
In fact, the parliamentarians had taken up a position on a high ridge to the northwest of Naseby, in the path of the advancing Royalist army. Their strategy was to lure the Royalists into attacking them. The 14,000 parliamentarians outnumbered the Royalists, who had only 9,000 soldiers present.
We're here fairly early in the morning, Mike, but not as early as the royalists and the parliamentarians, I understand.
No, they would have been here at 3 o'clock. The parliamentarians are on the ridge where we're standing now, and on the opposite ridge and over the other side, the royalists had formed up ready for battle. Fairfax and Cromwell, according to the story, come forward and come to roughly where we are now. Decide that it's too good a defensive position here.
What do you mean by that, that this is too good a position to defend? Surely that's a good thing, isn't it?
It is, but not if you want to draw the two sides to fight, because you're then going to get a stalemate between the two sides. Royalists are good enough to know that this is not some real attack, and we know that Parliament wanted to fight.
So from their position up here, high on the ridge, where did the parliamentarians move to?
They move across the fields behind us here, a couple of miles over in that direction, over through the trees.
And that's heading down off the ridge?
That's heading off the ridge onto a smaller, but also still a significant ridge as well.
And would it have been quite visible to the royalists, do we think, that the parliamentarians were on the move?
Oh yes, we know that they saw the Parliament's army moving, and there's a distinct possibility that they actually thought they were retreating.
The king's commander, Prince Rupert, was a highly experienced soldier. With a clear view of the land, he saw what appeared to be the new model army retreating.
On the royalist side, Prince Rupert is still going towards caution, but it's George Digby, who's one of Charles's courtiers, who said, no, the army's retreating, you should be turning around and going after them. And so King Charles then sends the royalist army to go and intercept the Parliament's army.
The two armies were now lined up in their final positions. The stage was set for an epic battle, for God and country, king and crown. 3 years into the Civil War, in just 3 hours of fighting, the ruling power in England would soon be changed forever.
On the 14th of June, 1645, royalists confronted the parliamentarians' new model army, just north of the village of Naseby in Northamptonshire. What was at stake was nothing short of how England was ruled.
Oliver Cromwell and Thomas Fairfax positioned their divisions of the new model army on a ridge facing King Charles and his army. The royalists occupied a front 1.5 miles long between the village of Clipston on their left and a thick line of high hedge known as the Solby hedges to their right.
Once the fog lifted at around 10 a.m, the battle began. And it was this hedge that provided Oliver Cromwell with an idea for a surprise attack. He ordered Colonel Oakey and his dragoon of light cavalry to ride down along this side of the hedge, using it to disguise their whereabouts, and then open fire on the royalist cavalry through the hedge as they charged past.
Cock your match. Present your pieces. Prepare to give fire. Give fire. You got me a rank.
Is that safe to approach now, John? That's done?
Certainly, we're all clear.
That's one hell of a bang, isn't it? I mean, it's ringing through the fields for ages after you've actually fired.
Now the smoke's cleared, reenactor John Dacomb is going to explain the ranks of soldiers who would have been fighting for Parliament.
John, this is a fine band of men you've amassed for us here on the battlefield today. Talk me through a little bit who everybody is, the kind of roles that they would have been playing out on the battlefield. You're all parliamentarians, are you?
We're all parliamentarians. We're all members of the new model army who fought at the Battle of Naseby. First over here, we have our captain of foot. The way you can tell that he's a captain is by the pole arm that he's carrying. This is a captain's leading staff. They would be used for directing the troops.
Okay.
Now you will see that he's wearing a sash across his shoulder.
Yeah.
Again, this signifies his rank, and also the fact that he's carrying a good quality sword. The sword is his secondary weapon.
And there's another one.
This is his dagger. He is also wearing a cloth of black colour, and a black in the 17th century would have been one of the most expensive dyes. So he in his clothing is showing his, not only his standing, but his personal wealth.
So it'd be quite distinguishable on the battlefield, would he? Kind of standing out.
There would be maybe 20 men dressed of a similar clothing within his regiment. He would have been commanding approximately 75 to 100 men.
So as an officer in the infantry, would he have been on foot as well?
As you see, he is wearing boots, and the butterflies, which are the leather piece that's on his foot, is actually to prevent the boots being damaged by the stirrups. So this would probably show that he does ride on occasion. We have a very experienced pikeman here. This gentleman is wearing armour with a leather short coat underneath it. The leather stops the chafing from the armour. The chest piece shows he's an experienced pikeman and that he's been in the army for several years. And the helmet, you'll see, has cheek pieces so that as he fights, the side facing his enemy is protecting his head as well.
And then a massive long pike here as well.
The pike is made of ash. In the 17th century, they would have been 16 to 20 feet long. As you see, tapered towards the top. And to protect the narrowness at the top end, there's langettes, because the cavalry used to like to hack off the top, thinner part of the pike. Sometimes during the fighting, if the pikes got knocked out of the pikeman's hand, or he was so close in that he couldn't use it, he would again have his sword as a secondary weapon.
There were big advances in gun technology in the years leading up to the Civil War. The matchlock musket was on its way out.
So this is the matchlock musket. It's fired by using a piece of burning rope.
Yep.
This is normally jute rope, and it's been steeped or boiled in saltpeter. Sometimes they use urine. And as you see, it burns slowly like a firework taper. The serious problem with this weapon is that if you've got 4,000 musketeers, as approximately they had in the Army of Parliament, this much rope will burn down in approximately an hour. So the pure logistics of carrying enough rope or match for all those musketeers is a major problem.
The solution was the invention of the flintlock, whose mechanism ignited the gunpowder with a spark from a flint striking a piece of metal. Reenactor Ken Brand is a dragoon today, a mounted infantryman who would have used one.
He's carrying a doglock carbine, which is an early form of flintlock. So called because this catch to the rear, it's an early safety catch. So once the dog is actually connected, that cannot be fired. And the idea being that you could load this weapon, put powder in the pan, and load it the same as a matchlock. When the musket is ready to be fired, the musket is pulled back to full cock, and then you just pull the trigger and you're ready to go.
The flintlock mechanism meant the gun could be carried loaded, but safe. And there was another advantage.
The beauty of it is that if you don't fight a battle, if you don't get into a skirmish, there is no expenditure in regards to match. Only during a firefight would he maybe have to replace the flint every 10, 20, 30 shots, depending on the flint. These were often used for dragoons, sometimes for cavalry. They were also used for the guarding of the powder store. So there was no danger from somebody carrying the match round barrels of gunpowder.
Yeah, okay. So this is progression in technology, is it? Up
It
towards
is indeed.
the flintlock?
Yes, certainly. Matchlocks have been out since the sort of 15th century, so they'd been around for 150 years or so.
Right.
So they were well-known technology. The flintlock had probably been around for about 25 years by this time, but not in great numbers because of the cost.
In the Civil War and here at Naseby, was there a mixture of these two types of weapons then, of firearm?
The majority of the infantry would still be on the matchlock.
Yeah.
But the specialist troops, the dragoons, would have used weapons like this.
After Cromwell's men fired at the royalists, the battle broke out in force. A firefight took place through the Solby hedges, and the exchange would have showered the battlefield with thousands of musket balls. Detectorist Peter Burton has promised to show me exactly where he looks for evidence of the gunfight. They've been buried here for nearly 400 years, but he's found large numbers of them.
This is a machine you can use. It's a standard metal detector which I've been using for years.
Let's put those on. So I've got a dull just...
That's it. All a metal detector does is sing a song. You've got to interpret that song. The pure sound is what you're looking for. There'll be all sorts of little burps and hiccups, which mean you're perhaps going over iron or stuff you don't want, but you're looking for a pure sound, because what we're looking for here really is lead, the lead of a musket ball.
After 5 minutes of searching, I'm finally serenaded by my detector.
I'm getting a beep. So trying to find that absolute epicenter of that racket in my ears.
Do you want to dig it up?
Well, let's have a look.
I don't want to deprive you of a musket ball if there is one there. You see, that shows you it's in there, okay?
Nothing there.
It's in that part.
Yeah.
Okay, break it in half again.
Okay, yeah. Oh.
It's in that half.
That
is a bullet.
That is a bullet.
Unfortunately, it's the wrong war. The Second War 303. They used to tow drogues over here with aeroplanes and practice machine guns on them, and I'm afraid they're one of the most prolific finds on this battlefield.
Thankfully, Peter's brought along some musket balls he found previously.
These are the sort of shot we find pretty typically on Naseby Field. That is a pintle shot. It's fired from a pintle gun that's mounted on a carriage. That is an ordinary musket ball fired by an ordinary trooper. That is a carbine ball, and that would have been fired by a dragoon. That's a pistol ball, and they were fired by cavalry. That is actually a musket ball that's hit something, and I suspect armour.
That started off like that.
That's it. Make a nasty mess of you if the armour hadn't been in the way.
Peter's 5 years of searching for Naseby artefacts have turned up more than just ammunition.
I found coins the other side of this hedge where Oakley's dragoons have shot some of Morris's men off their horses. You can see where they've actually hit the ground. In fact, I've got some coins here.
Make sure they don't... Oh, wow, look at this!
They're all silver and they're hammered coins.
So do you think that these might have fallen out of the pockets of soldiers and nobles as they fell over, or maybe fell off their horse?
Well, the men who fought here, the royalists who fought here, had only recently come from Leicester. They'd looted Leicester, so most soldiers had a quantity of coin in the pocket.
Goodness me. I mean, there's a date on there, 1605. Wow.
With his cavalry under fire from Parliament's dragoons, Royalist commander Prince Maurice instructed his musketeers to respond. Some of Peter's discoveries at this hedgerow have helped us understand how the exchange unfolded.
Finding artefacts here has enabled us to pretty much prove that the fight started along this hedge here, and that Maurice's commanded infantry drove Oakley's dragoons back from this hedge line below the crest of the hill for cover into the hedge we see below us there. But that put them straight into the best position to actually do the job that they were sent here to do in the first place.
The Royalist cavalry were unable to withstand the heavy fire from Oakley's dragoons, so the Royalists decided to move forward and attack Parliament's left flank.
Meanwhile, the redcoat infantry were advancing on the Royalists, firing their muskets. But they were so close to each other, they could only fire once before engaging in hand-to-hand fighting, using their swords or the butts of their rifles.
Fighting alongside the musketeers on both sides were pikemen, who would protect the musketeers while they were reloading. There would have been one pikeman for every 2 musketeers. Reenactor Tim Small is going to tell me about their role in the battle.
How effective would you have been on the battlefield here at Naseby?
Pike's usefulness at this stage, with the emergence of mass firepower, is this is a weapon to defend musketeers who are still quite fragile. You know, it takes a long time for them to load. It takes a very short time for the shock troops of the day, cavalry, to be able to cross the battlefield. So what you need is pike basically to stand in the way. So once the musketeers have fired and they kind of close the distance to the enemy, this is hand-to-hand fighting.
What are your chances of survival?
Well, my best chance of survival is clearly stick together. Pike is a team sport because by yourself, this is a fairly useless weapon.
Yeah.
When you're densely packed together, 6 deep, you're forming a dense hedgehog. So actually when we come right up close to each other, and we're in what's called press of pikes, we're densely, pushed against each other, and I'm fighting you with my sword, dagger. That makes a great weapon, because this is real close quarter combat. I might slip over, the guy in front of me might slip, we trip. All of a sudden that creates a break, and then the enemy's upon us. And then we're fleeing, and then we're being run down by the cavalry.
This is an incredibly courageous position to have on the battlefield.
You've got a seasoned cadre of experienced soldiers in the new model army, but then you've got a whole bunch of new recruits who have never seen action before. I mean, frankly, I've never seen 10,000 men before, all in one place.
Yeah.
There aren't 10,000 people in the village or the town that I live in. I've never heard anything louder than a thunderstorm. Now I'm hearing thousands of musketeers fire. I'm hearing artillery fire. I'll be honest, I'd be terrified. This is a brutal war. This is still soldiers coming face to face. I'm looking, as I am to you now, I'm looking into the eyes of my enemy. Not only am I looking into the eyes of my enemy, I'm looking into the eyes of fellow Englishmen. You might be from the same county as me.
How easy would it have been to fight with one of these enormously long bikes?
You know what? There's only one way to find out, and that's to have a go yourself. You're a strapping chap.
Come on then, just load me up.
I'll come around in front of you, so that'll be easier.
So I'm holding here.
Yep. Push up with your right arm. That's it.
And get that, and get the right arm underneath.
Yep.
There we go. Yep.
Right, now you're going to move your right leg back, and at the same time bring the pike down.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Keep this hand under your chin.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Okay,
you're gonna lock your hand over like that. There you go.
All right, now I'm ready.
Yeah, now you're ready for a bit of jabbing. Go on, give him.
Go
Give him. That's it. Go on.
So would I be kind of stepping forwards when
You'd be stepping forward because we're all pushed in together. We're going forward, so we're stepping. So step.
Step.
That's it. And we're pushing forward.
Yeah.
Then of course, because I know you really want to do this one, is to get right up at the high charge. You know that one where you hold it above your head?
Oh, the high charge.
Yeah, go on.
All right.
Go on. It's, right. So you do that. This is where me and the cameraman go for a cup of tea, and we'll tell you when we're done, or I'll give you a little, just kind of tickle him under there. No, bring you back down.
Whoa.
Very good.
There we go.
I think you're fully signed up now.
Well, I've had that for less than a minute, and I'm quite tired. It doesn't feel overly practical, but I guess the thing was, it was effective.
Yeah, again, back to providing you all stay together. That's the most important thing, because the moment you're isolated and you're on your own, or you start to break, you start to fracture, that's when the danger comes in.
Slowly but surely, Parliament's redcoat foot soldiers were driven back by the King's infantry. Not far away, the King's commander, Prince Rupert, had led the royalist cavalry in breaking through the redcoats' left flank. They started to attack the redcoats' supply train. Just 1 hour into the Battle of Naseby, around 11 a.m. on the 14th of June 1645, King Charles I had already taken the upper hand over the new model army. To find out how the battle progressed, I'm on a road right through the centre of the battlefield with historian Phil Harding.
We're at a point in the battle now where the royalists have made an advance. Would it be right to say that the parliamentarians are on the back foot?
The parliamentarians were losing that fight. They were being driven back. And there's evidence that some of the regiments of the new model army were being forced to withdraw and retire.
With Parliament's infantry being pushed back, Oliver Cromwell and his famous cavalry regiment, the Ironsides, came to the rescue. We're now at the centre of the battlefield, looking out to where Cromwell would have engaged the royalist cavalry.
So on the royalist side, we have Marmaduke Langdale, one of the King's northern lieutenants, Cromwell's cavalry, who are on this side on the right flank of the parliamentarians. Probably the bulk of Cromwell's cavalry are not visible because they're on the top and then behind the crest of the hill. He quite conceivably outnumbers Langdale maybe as much as 2 to 1. Langdale's men will probably be more and more disheartened as wave after wave of parliamentarian cavalry come over that ridge and start to push them off the back of the battlefield, but also away from what is their principal role here, which is protecting the flank of the infantry.
That's leaving them vulnerable, isn't it?
That is the critical point.
At this moment, Prince Rupert, the royalist commander, was still away from the battlefield, attacking Parliament's supply train of artillery.
Rupert was experienced, He'd been in multiple campaigns, he'd fought in continental Europe, he'd been exposed to different styles of fighting, and he knew what he was about. He was a soldier, he was a privateer, he was, quite literally the embodiment of the Cavalier attitude, but he was also brash, and he was probably arrogant in what he believed as well, and as such, those could be weaknesses that could be exploited.
When the critical moment arrives and the royalist reserves need to be fed in to plug that gap, essentially the man whose job it is to give those orders is not there. The king is there, and the king, we think, probably does attempt to give that order, but his courtiers are unhappy about him exposing himself to danger. So the royalist reserves don't plug that gap. And that means that as Langdale's men are forced off the back of the battlefield, the second and third lines of Cromwell's cavalry are able to fold in behind the men who are becoming increasingly exposed on the top of the ridge.
In effect, Cromwell's Ironsides were able to enclose the royalist infantry and cut them off from the rest of the army.
The Bluecoats, Prince Rupert's regiment of foot, make a stand in the middle of the battlefield. It becomes surrounded, basically, by enemies who are all shooting into the middle. They ask them to surrender, they don't, they give them another dose of shot. They probably ask them to surrender again, and then another hail of bullets come in. So that's a heroic last stand, if you like, but that's more to buy time for the king to make his escape and to allow those people that are able to retreat, some chance of getting away from the battlefield. It's not really helping out the guys that are exposed on the ridge. And by this stage, they are now starting to lay down their weapons.
At around 3:30 p.m, as the royalist foot soldiers lay down their arms, King Charles I and his lifeguards fled the battlefield.
So the signature, if you like, of that phase of the battle at Naseby is not one of mass slaughter, but is one of mass surrender.
1,000 royalists had been killed. Another 5,000 were captured, along with the royal gunpowder supplies. The parliamentarians lost just 400 men.
The Battle of Naseby destroyed the king's army. The parliamentarians went on to hunt down and wipe out the last pockets of resistance. King Charles I now lacked the resources to rebuild. Eventually, he surrendered to the Scots, who handed him over to Parliament.
Within a year, the First English Civil War had been won, and Parliament had established its right to a permanent role in the governance of the country. This was the beginning of a proper parliamentary democracy in Britain. And in 1649, almost 4 years after Naseby, the death sentence of Charles I was unanimously passed. On an icy morning, here on Whitehall, he was beheaded for high treason.
I think the legacy on the British Army that we know today of the establishment of the new model army, the Battle of Naseby, is enormous. And it's really something that transcends the centuries. What Naseby proved is that the decision to have a smaller band of professional soldiers, people who'd be well trained, who receive a regular wage and absolutely perfect their art of soldiering, was the way in which Britain would continue to fight wars in the future.
The monarchy was abolished in 1649, and the Commonwealth of England was established as a republic. But it was short-lived, and the monarchy was restored in 1660 with the crowning of King Charles II. From this point on, the monarch would preside as head of state over a parliamentary democracy to make our laws. The Battle of Naseby changed the course of our nation's history forever.